to play with you at third base, and was it Nettles?
There was a lot of tough slides and stuff, and I slid in kind of hard. It was gonna bang bang play, so I slid in kind of late, and as I slid in, I hit the bag and I popped up and just bam, smoking right, getting a big fight. Benches clearing brawl, first inning of the final game of the playoffs. No one got thrown out.
No one got thrown
out.
I hate his guts. That is not some old quote from a bitter ex-player. That is George Brett, one of the greatest to ever play the game, talking about people he still cannot forgive today. Brett has 8 names, 8 people whose actions burned him so deep he never let go. Some of them are enemies, one is a teammate, and the biggest one changed baseball history. George Brett is a Hall of Famer, a legend who chased a .400 batting average and nearly touched it. He played third base for the Kansas City Royals with everything he had, every single day. And if you love this kind of old school baseball heat, tap the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. Now here's the thing about Brett. When he was playing, the saying went that hate meant respect. If you competed hard and burned hard for the game, it meant you cared more than everyone else around you. And George Brett cared more than almost anybody who ever put on a uniform. But at some point, caring crosses a line. At some point, carrying 8 names of people you cannot forgive well into your 70s starts to raise a question. Is this the fire of a competitor? Or is this something heavier? Something Brett never quite figured out how to put down? Today, we are going to count every single one of them down. From number 8 all the way to number 1. The grudge that still makes Brett's blood run hot. Some of these rivalries were born on the field, some played out in newspapers and courtrooms, and one of them started right inside the Kansas City Royals' own clubhouse. They were all, in one way or another, way out of bounds. These are the 8 men George Brett cannot forgive. And by the end of this, you might wonder whether forgiveness was ever really the point. You might also start to understand that for a man like Brett, the line between passion and grudge was never as clear as the rest of us might like it to be. Let's start here, because this one might catch you off guard. The man sitting at number 8 on this list is not a player. He never hit a pitch at Brett or tried to slide into his base with sharp spikes. He never cheated or took anything to get stronger. He was an umpire. And when he retired in 2024, Brett was among the very first to make his feelings crystal clear. Number 8 belongs to Angel Hernandez. For those who do not follow baseball closely, an umpire is the official who calls balls, strikes, outs, and safe plays. Think of them as the referees of baseball. A great umpire does the job cleanly, stays in the background, and lets the game breathe. You barely notice them when they are doing it right. That is exactly the standard Brett has always held officials to. He believes a good umpire should be invisible. Unless a call is absolutely necessary, the man behind home plate should let the players in the moment do all the talking. Hernandez was the opposite of that. For decades, Hernandez was one of the most talked about figures in baseball. Not because of great calls, not because of clean, accurate officiating. He was talked about because of mistakes, blown calls, spectacular errors that changed games in the wrong direction. And he was talked about because of his ejections. He threw players and managers out of games at a rate that left casual fans shaking their heads. Every ejection placed Hernandez at the center of the story, and that is exactly what Brett found so deeply offensive. People who played during Brett's peak era had a specific way of describing what it felt like to be on the wrong side of Hernandez. They would say he would mess you over once during a series, then he would do it again, then once more after that. There was no accountability, no consequence. Hernandez kept working, kept making calls that hurt teams, and kept walking back to his position like nothing had happened at all. Brett's frustration runs deeper than individual calls. In the hard-fought baseball of the 1970s and 1980s, he says that kind of ego-driven officiating would never have been tolerated. The game had a code. Players policed themselves. Managers pushed back loudly when they had to. The expectation was that the officials who ran the game would respect its sanctity above all else. To Brett, a ballpark is almost sacred. Treating it as a personal stage is a deep offense against everything he has ever stood for. What makes this grudge particularly telling is its timing. This is the newest one on the entire list. Hernandez only retired in 2024. Most of Brett's other grudges stretch back 40 or 50 years, but this one is fresh. That tells you something important about the man. He is still watching, still paying attention, still ready to name names. Hernandez spent decades as the most controversial official in the sport. And Brett believes that level of sustained incompetence, with no real accountability to speak of, would never have been tolerated in his era. The game in the 1970s had no room for officials who turned themselves into the story. When the chapter finally closed in 2024, Brett did not stay quiet about it. Number 8, the newest grudge on the list, the one that proves the fire never really cooled. Now, if number 8 is about a man who made the game too much about his own ego, the man at number 7 made it too much about one specific number. His batting average, not his team, not the score, not the pennant race. Just his personal average, protected like a prized possession. Number 7 belongs to Wade Boggs. First, let us be completely fair. Wade Boggs was a magnificent baseball player, a Hall of Famer, 5 batting titles, a career average that puts him among the finest contact hitters who ever played the sport. This is not about whether Boggs was talented. He absolutely was. But the way he approached the game drove George Brett genuinely, persistently, deeply crazy. Boggs was obsessed with his batting average. In baseball, your batting average measures the percentage of times you get a hit out of every time you step to the plate. A high average means you are getting hits consistently and keeping contact clean. And Boggs chased that number with a focus that went beyond dedication and crossed into something else entirely. He reportedly viewed home runs as mistakes, as swings that went wrong, as evidence that something in his approach had slipped. To Boggs, the ideal outcome every single time was a clean hit. Get on base, protect the number, keep the average column high. Brett thought this was the completely wrong way to think about hitting. Brett was also a batting title winner and knows what the chase feels like. He nearly hit .400 in 1980, which is one of the rarest accomplishments in the entire sport. But he believed the purpose of hitting was never to protect a statistic. It was to win the moment, to come to the plate when the game was on the line and put the ball somewhere it could not be caught. That was what hitting meant to him, not a number, a result that helped his team win. Brett saw himself as a clutch performer above all else. His goal was to hit the ball solid in high-pressure situations, not to play it safe, not to manage a personal stat, to compete when competing was hardest, when the game tightened, when the stadium went quiet, when everything was on the line and someone had to be the one to step into that moment. Brett wanted to be that person, not to protect a batting average, to win. That difference in philosophy created a real, lasting tension between these two men. Both were elite, both won batting titles, both earned enormous respect across the league, but they played for entirely different reasons. Boggs was climbing toward a personal milestone. Brett was trying to win a baseball game. Brett's deeper frustration was about what Boggs represented for younger players watching. If they looked at Boggs and decided that chasing averages was what baseball was truly about, where did that leave the fire? Where did that leave the moment when somebody simply had to deliver? Brett called it the Academy Award approach to the sport, looking great on the stats sheet, winning the numbers, but missing the real point of why the game exists at all. Here is what separates number 7 from every other entry on this list. Boggs was not a villain. He did not kick anyone in the face. He did not manipulate a rule book. He did not cheat. He just played the game in a way that Brett found profoundly wrong in spirit, a way that missed the entire meaning of competition. For someone who played every single game like it might be his last, watching another player treat baseball as a personal statistics exercise was almost unbearable. Number 7, the most quietly grinding irritation Brett ever carried. That quiet irritation leads straight into the next man, because number 6 did not miss the meaning of the game quietly. He blew right past it with an entirely different kind of problem, not a stats obsession, a shortcut. Number 6 is Jose Canseco. By the time Canseco arrived in the late 1980s, Brett was in the final stretch of his career. He had spent decades grinding, visualizing pitches in his mind before games, working on his swing before anyone else arrived at the field and after everyone else had already gone home. He had built his reputation the hard way, through mental toughness and relentless competitive drive. Then he watched a new generation appear with physical builds that did not look natural, with power numbers that did not make sense. And eventually Canseco himself admitted the truth. He had been using steroids and other performance-enhancing substances. Brett called it a steroid-enriched life, and he believed it wreaked havoc on the natural balance of the game he loved. For those unfamiliar, steroids in this context were banned substances that allowed players to build muscle faster, recover quicker, and hit the ball much farther than their natural ability would allow. It was cheating. It was also widespread across the sport for a period of time. But Canseco became the face of that era because he was so open about it, eventually writing a book detailing exactly what he and others had done. That confession did not earn Brett's respect. It deepened his contempt. The problem for Brett was not only the cheating in isolation, it was the attitude surrounding it. Canseco carried himself with a cockiness Brett had absolutely no patience for. He was superhuman in the headlines and on the highlight reels, but his defensive performance was poor. He was a liability in the outfield. The same substance that inflated his power numbers seemed to push him away from the parts of baseball Brett valued most: the grinding defensive work, the team sacrifice, winning over your own personal statistic. And on top of all that, the home run records that Canseco and others built during that era remain permanently marked by doubt in the eyes of people who care about the history of the sport. And then came the reports about the fans. Brett was the kind of player who believed deeply in giving everything to the people who showed up to watch. He played every game as if the crowd in the stands deserved every ounce of effort he had. So when reports emerged that Canseco had been charging young children for his autograph, that landed somewhere personal for Brett. An autograph to a young fan should always be free. That was the code Brett lived by every single day, and Canseco broke it without hesitation. For Brett, Canseco represented the complete betrayal of an era. Not just the steroid use, not just the arrogance, the whole package. The shortcuts, the money focus, the individual spotlight treated as more valuable than team effort. Brett had spent years fighting to prove that hard work and collective hustle could beat flash and arrogance. Then a new version of flash arrived, one manufactured in a laboratory rather than earned on a practice field. And it left a permanent stain on the game. Number 6. Not just a personal grudge, a symbol of everything that went wrong before the game found its way back, from symbols to swagger. Number 5 is the original version of that flash and arrogance, built on pure personality alone and without any chemical assistance whatsoever. He walked into every stadium like the lights came on for him and nobody else. Number 5 is Reggie Jackson. Let us be honest about one thing before going further. Reggie Jackson was a genuinely great baseball player. His nickname, Mr. October, was earned on the biggest stages available. He was a dominant force in World Series moments, and a player who delivered when the whole world was watching. That part, even Brett could not take away from him. But Jackson did not just play great baseball. He performed it. He turned it into a production. He walked into every stadium like the spotlight already belonged to him before the first pitch was thrown. He called himself the straw that stirs the drink, meaning that without him, the New York Yankees would be flat and flavorless. To Brett, that kind of statement was a direct violation of everything baseball should fundamentally be about. The Kansas City Royals were built on a completely different foundation. They were the hard-working team from the Midwest, the grinders, the players who showed up without expecting anything to be handed to them. They competed for every win and earned whatever they got through effort. That was the culture Brett lived inside and believed in deeply. Jackson was the exact opposite of everything that culture valued. What made the friction between these two so unusual is that it barely required conversation. Brett has said that he and Jackson did not have to talk to hate each other. Their mere presence on the same field was enough to trigger a mutual recognition of everything they disagreed about. Two men, two entirely different ideas about what baseball was for. Both of them understood the conflict the instant they looked across the diamond. Jackson's whole approach was also tied to the bigger story of the era. The Yankees in the late 1970s were seen as the dominant, flashy force of the American East. The city of New York was burning around them in chaos, and Jackson was the biggest flame in the Bronx. The media followed him everywhere. The highlights always seemed to center on his at-bats, his home runs, his interviews where he talked freely about his own greatness. For Brett and the Royals, who were fighting every October just to be taken seriously as contenders, watching Jackson absorb all that attention felt like a direct insult to everything they were building. Brett saw Jackson's persona as a sin against the values he believed the sport was built on. Humility was supposed to matter. Collective effort was supposed to matter. You were supposed to win for the team, not your own highlight reel. What makes this grudge interesting is how long it lasted without a single defining incident. Not one play, not one moment. A years-long clash of identities playing out every October in the most important games of the season. Every time Brett stepped onto the field against Jackson, he was not just playing a baseball game. He was making an argument. The argument never got resolved. Jackson kept being Jackson. Brett kept being Brett. Number 5. Every ounce of that quiet, simmering, unspoken, and permanent rivalry lives right here, from the clash of philosophies to the clash of pure, unfiltered fire. Number 4 is not about attitude or aesthetics. This one is about war, the real kind, the ninth inning kind, with the whole season on the line and nothing soft about any of it. Number 4 belongs to Reggie Gossage, better known as Goose, one of the hardest throwing relief pitchers who ever stood on a mound. In baseball, a relief pitcher is a pitcher who comes into the game late to protect a lead. They throw hard, they work with intensity, and the great ones can dominate even the very best hitters in the highest pressure moments the sport can produce. Gossage was among the most feared pitchers in all of baseball during the late 1970s and early 1980s. He averaged more than 30 saves per season, which means 30 times per year he came in and closed out games that mattered. He was a consecutive all-star, the toughest relief pitcher in the American League. Nobody wanted to face him, and he despised George Brett just as much as Brett despised him. That is the heart of this one. Both men had massive egos. Both had what Brett calls a killing instinct on the field. Brett was the most feared hitter in the league. Gossage was the most feared pitcher. When these two faced each other, something had to give, and neither man was willing to be the one who gave it. The hatred between them ran mostly in silence. It was communicated entirely through the velocity of pitches and the violence of swings. Gossage threw close to 100 miles an hour, which is an extremely fast baseball, and Brett would be waiting at the plate, locked in completely, refusing to flinch even slightly. The crowd knew it. Both dugouts knew it. Players on both teams would go quiet when these two were facing each other, because everyone in the ballpark understood that something real was happening out there. The whole stadium felt the weight of it every time they met. After the 1983 Pine Tar incident, which we are saving for number 1, Gossage told reporters that he wanted to physically harm Brett, that he planned to hit him in the neck the very next time they faced each other. In baseball, hitting a batter with a pitch is called a hit by pitch. It stings and sometimes causes real injury. Gossage did not frame this as a baseball strategy. He framed it as a personal mission. That is how hot this thing burned between them. Here is the complicated part. Later in life, after both men had retired and the battles were behind them, they found something like a quiet peace. They became friendly the way that retired athletes sometimes do, bonded by shared history even when that history was violent. But Brett is completely clear that the playing days hatred was 100% real, not an act, not exaggerated for the cameras. Genuine fuel that powered some of the best performances either of them ever produced. You could argue they needed each other to reach their peaks. Brett's greatest moments often came directly against Gossage, and Gossage's reputation as an untouchable closer was partly built on the drama of facing Brett. Each man made the other bigger, not through friendship, but through the absolute refusal to back down from the other. Number 4. The ninth inning war that never truly ended even after the ninth inning was long past. From the war at the mound to the war at third base. Number 3 is the grudge that turned physical in the most direct way possible. Not pitcher and batter, not strategy and timing. Fists, a kick, a full bench-clearing brawl in the middle of a playoff game in October. Number 3 goes to Graig Nettles, third baseman for the New York Yankees, and the man who put his boot into George Brett's face in 1977. By the late 1970s, the Kansas City Royals and the New York Yankees had built one of the most intense rivalries in American League history. They met in the postseason year after year, and every series carried more heat than the one before it. The players on both sides simply did not like each other. That was not a secret to anyone. But what happened in Game 5 of the 1977 American League Championship Series, which is the playoff round played just before the World Series, went far beyond ordinary dislike. In the bottom of the first inning, Brett hit a line drive that found a gap and kept rolling through the outfield. He rounded second base and kept running hard toward third. When he slid into the bag, his momentum brought him into contact with Nettles, which is completely normal. Slides happen in baseball. Bodies collide. Every player who has ever put on a uniform understands this is part of the game. What happened next was not part of the game. While Brett was still on the ground, still in the process of rising, Nettles delivered a kick directly to Brett's face. Not incidental contact, not an accident from the slide. A deliberate kick at a man who was already down on the dirt. Brett rose and responded in an instant. He punched Nettles in the head. Within seconds, every player from both dugouts poured onto the field. A full bench-clearing brawl with players grabbing each other, coaches pulling bodies apart, and the whole scene threatening to come completely undone. In the chaos, something unexpected happened. Thurman Munson, the Yankees catcher, entered the brawl, but he did not go after Brett. Munson had a reputation for being tough and not particularly warm toward opposing players, but he positioned himself close to Brett and told him directly that no one was going to hit him while he was down. Munson was there to protect him. That moment stayed with Brett for the rest of his life. He earned a deep and lasting respect for Munson because of it. Nettles earned the opposite. The umpires, despite seeing exactly what had happened, allowed both men to stay in the game. No ejection for the kick, no punishment of any kind. This was simply how baseball worked in that era, which is extraordinary to consider today. No one watching in that stadium demanded accountability and got it. The Royals lost that game 5-3, the Yankees moved on to the World Series, and Nettles collected his share of the glory while Brett sat with the full weight of what had just happened to him. For Brett, the cheap shot, combined with the absence of any consequence, and the final loss created something that never healed properly. Nettles had violated what Brett calls the soul of the sport. You compete hard, you play physical, you protect your base, but you do not kick a man who is already on the ground. No pennant race, no series, no championship ever justifies that. Number 3. Some things simply do not fade. Now here's the one nobody sees coming. Number 2 is not a Yankee, not a rival from another city who came after Brett in competition or tried to tear down what he was building. Number 2 is a teammate, a Kansas City Royal, a man who shared Brett's dugout, his clubhouse, and his fight to build something lasting in Missouri. Number 2 belongs to Hal McRae. To understand this one fully, you need to go back to the very last day of the 1976 season. The American League batting title was on the line. In baseball, the batting title goes to the player who finishes the season with the highest batting average. Going into the final day of games, McRae held the lead over Brett by the thinnest margin imaginable. 5/10,000ths of a percentage point separated them. McRae was sitting at .33078, and Brett was at .33073. That is how impossibly close it was. In Brett's final game against the Minnesota Twins, he hit a fly ball to left field. The Twins outfielder Steve Bry had a clean chance to catch it. He stopped running. He let the ball bounce past him and over his head. Brett ran all the way around the bases for what is called an inside-the-park home run, meaning you hit the ball and circle all 4 bases without stopping. That home run lifted Brett above McRae in the average race and handed him the batting title. McRae was watching every second of it. and he was not confused about what he had just seen. McRae stated publicly and without hesitation that Twins manager Gene Mauch had instructed Bride to let the ball drop on purpose. His reasoning was direct and devastating. He believed it was allowed to fall so that a white player would win the batting title instead of a black player. McRae said plainly that it was too bad things were still like that in 1976. Brett heard every word, and he said he felt just as bad about it as McRae did. Consider what that means for a moment. Brett won the batting title. He achieved something genuinely remarkable, and it arrived wrapped in a shadow he has never been able to shake loose. He could not prove the play was manipulated. He could not know for certain one way or the other. But McRae's pain was real, and Brett could feel the full weight of it. Knowing that the legitimacy of your own achievement might be questioned through no fault of your own is not a comfortable place to stand, and it remained uncomfortable for decades. But the McRae story does not end in 1976. Their relationship beyond that moment was defined by what Brett has called clubhouse friction. McRae was a fierce competitor who pushed Brett relentlessly. He shouted, he challenged, he applied intense pressure through confrontations that Brett initially hated. The friction between them was real, sustained, and not easy to be around. But Brett has also admitted, looking back with clear eyes, that he needed every bit of it. McRae's relentless pressure made him a better leader and a better player. The confrontations forced Brett to find a toughness inside himself that he might not have discovered on his own. He hated the process. He appreciated the result. And that is a difficult thing to hold in your hands at the same time. So this grudge is tangled in a way that none of the others are. Respect, gratitude, racial pain, competitive guilt, and the complicated loyalty that only comes from grinding alongside someone through years of real struggle together. Number 2 on this list, the most painful and complicated place Brett has ever had to stand. And now we are here. Number 1, the biggest grudge on the entire list. The one that Brett has described as bringing out stark red-eyed anger even decades later. The one that moved from a baseball field into a courtroom. The one that lasted 26 days and stands as one of the most famous moments in the whole history of Major League Baseball. Number 1 belongs to Billy Martin. Billy Martin was the manager of the New York Yankees. He was brilliant at his job. Nobody is taking that away from him. He understood the game deeply, motivated his players fiercely, and won. But Martin had a specific way of using the rulebook, not to protect the integrity of competition, not to make things fair, to trap opponents through technicality when he could not simply beat them through the talent on his roster. On July 24, 1983, he found the perfect moment to spring his trap. Brett came to the plate in the top of the 9th inning, with the Royals trailing the Yankees 4-3. He faced Goose Gossage, the same man from number 4 on this list. In a high-pressure moment, Brett did what great hitters do in great moments. He hit a 2-run home run. The Royals led 5-4. The game seemed to be decided. Martin walked calmly to home plate and spoke to rookie umpire Tim McClelland. He pointed at Brett's bat, specifically at the pine tar on it. Pine tar is a sticky substance batters apply near the handle of their bat to improve their grip. It is completely legal, but there is a rule that says pine tar cannot extend more than 17 inches up the bat from the handle. Martin claimed Brett's pine tar went past that limit. McClelland measured the bat against home plate, which is exactly 17 inches wide. The pine tar on Brett's bat extended beyond the line. McClelland raised his arm. Brett was called out. The home run was erased. The Yankees had not won through pitching or hitting. They had won through a measurement taken with the bat across a rubber slab. What happened next became one of the defining images in baseball history. Brett exploded from the dugout in a rage that few people in the stadium had ever witnessed, from any player in any sport. He later said his mind blanked out completely from the intensity of it. The fury was so total he could not think clearly. He had to be physically restrained. But the image of that sprint, that explosion from the dugout, that raw and primal reaction to what he saw as outright theft, burned itself permanently into the memory of the sport. And here's the part that made it so much worse for Brett. Martin had known about the pine tar for weeks. He had waited. He waited deliberately for the exact moment when the challenge would do the most damage. Not in the 1st inning when it would change nothing. Not in the 5th inning when the game was still undecided. In the 9th inning, after a home run had just decided the game in the Royals' favor. That patience, that cold and deliberate calculation, that willingness to hold the move until it would hurt the very most. Brett saw it as a calculated, cold attempt to steal a victory through the most trivial possible means. And that calculated coldness was what made it unforgivable. The story did not end there. American League President Lee MacPhail reviewed the situation and overturned the call. The home run stood. The game was ordered to be resumed from the point of Brett's hit. Problem solved? Not for Martin, and not for Yankees owner George Steinbrenner. Working together, they hired the prominent attorney Roy Cohn and took the matter all the way to the New York Supreme Court. Lawsuits were filed. Every legal tool available was deployed to prevent the game from being finished. The legal battle stretched across 26 days. When the game was finally played out to its conclusion, the stadium was nearly empty. A ghost town. A handful of people in the seats witnessed the end of a game that should have taken 5 additional minutes to complete. For Brett, this was not just poor sportsmanship. It was a complete rejection of what competition is supposed to mean. The idea that the players on the field determine the outcome. Not lawyers, not courtrooms, not a rulebook being wielded as a weapon. Martin took that away. He orchestrated the entire thing with cold and precise calculation, then fought through every legal channel he could find to preserve it. For Brett, Martin was a man who decided that winning through technicality was just as good as winning through talent and effort. It was not. It never will be. And Brett has never forgiven him for it. Number 1, the biggest one on the list, the one that still burns. Now you have all 8, and if you take a step back and look at them together, a pattern starts to emerge. Number 8, Angel Hernandez, made the game about his own ego when his only job was to stay invisible. Number 7, Wade Boggs, chased a personal statistic when the entire point of a team sport is to compete for something larger than a number. Number 6, Jose Canseco, traded the grind for a shortcut and poisoned a generation of the game. Number 5, Reggie Jackson, wore flash and individual glory like armor. Everything Brett believed was a betrayal of what the sport was built on. Number 4, Goose Gossage, fought Brett with real fire and genuine fury in a rivalry that left both men better and angrier. Number 3, Graig Nettles, kicked a man who was already on the ground and walked away without facing any consequence. Number 2, Hal McRae sits in the most painful spot of all, the one where the grudge is tangled up with deep respect, earned gratitude, and a racial shadow that should never have touched a batting title race. And number 1, Billy Martin, weaponized a rulebook and then weaponized the legal system to take away a moment Brett had earned through talent alone. 8 men, 8 violations of the things Brett held most important, and 1 man who has carried all of them for decades without putting a single one down. Here's where we have to be honest about what this list actually says. Holding 8 active grudges well into your 70s is a heavy thing to carry. It says something undeniable about Brett's fire and competitive spirit, but it also says something about his limits. The intensity that built his legend is the exact same intensity that never let him set these things aside. That is a complicated truth about great competitors. They burn so bright for so long that the fire does not always know when the time has come to soften. And maybe that is part of the price of greatness. Maybe to chase a .400 batting average, to sprint from a dugout over a bat measurement, to play every single inning as though it personally mattered above all else, you have to carry things a little heavier than the people around you. The same fire that builds you also weighs on you, and sometimes it is genuinely difficult to tell where the passion ends and the burden begins. But here is what is also undeniably true about all 8 of these rivalries. They made the game better. Not the cheating, not the kick to the face, not the courtroom battles, but the competition itself. The Royals against the Yankees in October after October. Brett against Gossage in the 9th inning with everything riding on one pitch. The batting title race that came down to 5/10,000ths of a percentage point. The Pine Tar game that ended in a legal war lasting nearly a month. These stories have been told and retold for decades because they were alive, because real human emotion was packed into every one of them, because the men on those fields were competing like the outcome mattered to their very souls. Baseball in the 1970s and 1980s felt like something that could crack open at any moment. A huge part of the reason it felt that way was men like George Brett, men who showed up every day ready to fight for every inch of ground, who loved the game so completely that any violation of its soul felt like a personal attack worth remembering forever. So yes, Brett still carries 8 names. Yes, that is a heavy weight. Yes, it says as much about him as it says about the men he cannot forgive, but it also means that when he walks into a ballpark even today, the game still lives inside him with full force. And that is worth celebrating. Like this video if you love old school baseball stories. Subscribe so you never miss one. Drop a comment telling us which grudge surprised you most. We will see you at the next one.